globally, COVID-19 has infected more than 115,000 people, killing 4,200 worldwide. In addition to the travel ban, the White House also announced it would provide emergency economic relief in the form of low-interest loans for small business and payroll tax relief. But as Warren Hogan mentioned earlier, that has not gone down well with the markets and not a sufficient response in the view of many investors. Also in the US, the NBA has suspended its season until further notice after a Utah player tested positive for COVID-19. The coronavirus crisis also continues to grip Italy as that government announced new restrictions to shut all shops apart from supermarkets and chemists. Let's go live to our regular international and US expert, non-resident fellow at the US Study Centre, James Brown. James, what do you make of this situation right now and the global response? We see pockets, clusters emerging. How is this having an impact on not just trade but international relations generally?
Well, look, there's a lot to map out on here, and the insurance companies are trying to do precisely that. Governments are trying to do precisely that as well. I mean, one of the consequences for what President Trump has announced today in shutting down movement between Europe and the US is how does the US manage the large numbers of military personnel it has in Europe to make sure that they don't get infected and that they can still continue to do their job? Are they going to allow them to travel around because they need to do their job? So there's a lot of factors here. I've got to say, the President, although his staff managed to get him behind the desk and reading off the teleprompter, still not really inspiring confidence, missing words, mispronouncing words, feeling very flat, and I think his platitudes are falling flatter than ever. You can't get a coronavirus test kit in Manhattan from a doctor at the moment and won't be able to for another 2 weeks, and that's not going to inspire confidence for American voters or citizens.
Well, this is the situation which I find, well, it's so ironic that it emerged in China at a seafood market in Wuhan. Potentially it's going to have its worst effects in the United States.
Yeah, and the effects of this will be felt at all levels. One of the interesting things in the President's announcement today was his focus on how he'd co-opted insurers to reduce co-payments for those that need to see a doctor because of coronavirus, and his signal that he's going to ask Congress to pump more money into everyday voters. I mean, he's very conscious that this virus, this crisis, plays into what the Democrats are talking about, their narrative on a failing healthcare system and their narrative on an economic system that's left a lot of workers behind. So he's got to act on that, and right now he's looking politically vulnerable.
Well, vulnerable in a number of ways, James, as well, because behind the desk and auto cue, that's not his stick, is it? He wants to get out there at the rallies and talk to tens of thousands of people, but potentially that's going to be not possible over at least for the foreseeable future.
I've seen the President in the room, and he can command an audience, he can command a cocktail party, and he can be quite influencing in the way he speaks. But you're right, that picture of him today was not inspiring at all. The press conferences he's done have been rambling and incoherent. His rallies, you would expect, will discontinue. We've already seen the Democratic rallies discontinued because of coronavirus. The President's rolling campaign rallies that he's had throughout the last couple of years, you would expect would discontinue soon. He's not in an environment that's his natural turf. It's much more the natural turf of someone like Mike Pence, but the President is really being hemmed in at the moment.
And it's an interesting scenario as well, in the sense that not just the President but the two Democratic candidates, in terms of their demographic, they're all they're the age cohort most vulnerable to this particular virus.
Yep, and all three of them in their 70s. Some of them, or at least two of them, not in great health. Bernie Sanders has already had heart trouble. The President, who has, despite his Surgeon General talking about the fact that he's healthier than most 30-year-olds, hasn't released his health records. So they are in the demographic, and you've got to think, if you're part of the political machine in the US, you're thinking about the impact of this virus on turnout for voting as well, depending on how long it lasts.
Yeah, exactly, and just finally, James, the other component is, in terms of how long it lasts, is the impact on the economy and the markets, because as we know, and we've discussed it many times, so much in the US system, as it is here, but in the US political system, it comes down to how the economy's travelling.
Yeah, and the president has hung his hat on the economy. That's been his signature strength in the last couple of years. He's facing not only the impact of coronavirus, but building on the US-China trade tensions, the difficulties in the international oil market, and really the uncertainty of the traditional responses to a crisis like this. There was a fairly interesting argument on the weekend here in some of our papers about the fact that usual stimulus measures won't work potentially, that some of the tools the US would normally have, particularly in how it raises or lowers interest rates, just aren't there this time round. So the president's facing quite a significant storm in terms of stabilising this crisis and getting the economy back to the strengths that he's relied on for a lot of his political narrative.
It really is a fascinating time right now, James. Great to get your insights. James Brown, we'll talk to you next week.